There is a kind of man who walks into a room and the air changes. Not because he is loud. Not because he demands attention. It is because he does not leak. He does not waste a single drop of himself on things that do not deserve it. While other men are reacting, spinning, exhausting themselves on noise, he is still. Contained. Burning low and steady, like a coal that never needs to flare to prove it's hot. You have met men like this. Maybe you've only met one once, and you never forgot him. And somewhere inside you, you already know, you are not him yet. Not because you lack the fire. Because you've been spending it in all the wrong places. This is the story of how a man learns to master his energy. Not manufacture it. Not fake it with stimulants and hype music. Master it, the way a swordsman masters a blade he's carried for 30 years. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will see exactly where your energy has been leaking, and exactly how to seal it shut. And if this is the kind of thing that speaks to something in you, the discipline, the silence, the steel, inner steel is built for exactly this. Stay close. There's a lot more coming. Point 1. Energy follows attention. Here is the first truth, and it will reframe everything that follows. Your energy does not disappear on its own. It follows your attention, like water follows a slope. Wherever your mind goes, your energy goes with it. So if you feel drained at the end of every day, the question is not, why am I so tired? The question is, where has my attention been living? In the winter of 1941, the German army stood at the edge of Moscow. Hitler's generals believed the city would fall within days. The Soviet high command was in near panic. And in the middle of this collapsing world stood a man named Georgy Zhukov, a general who would later be remembered as one of the most relentless military minds of the century. But what made Zhukov dangerous in that winter was not his strategy on paper. It was where he refused to let his attention go. His staff reported that during the darkest weeks, when scouts brought conflicting and often terrifying intelligence, rumors of breakthroughs, rumors of betrayal, rumors that the government itself was preparing to flee, Zhukov would not engage with the noise. He had a rule for his officers: bring me what is confirmed, not what is feared. He refused to spend his attention, and therefore his energy, on rumor. While panic ate through the rest of the command structure like rust through iron, Zhukov directed every unit of his focus toward the only thing that mattered, where the next real threat would emerge, and how to meet it. He held the line. Moscow did not fall. Historians still debate the tactics, but almost everyone agrees on one thing: Zhukov's ability to filter his attention under extreme pressure was as decisive as any troop movement. He did not have more hours in his day than his terrified colleagues. He did not have more information. What he had was a refusal to let his mind, and therefore his energy, go where it did not need to go. This is the pattern you need to see in your own life. Every time you doom scroll a stranger's argument online, every time you replay a conversation from 3 days ago trying to win it in your head, every time you let your mind drift toward a future catastrophe that hasn't happened, you are doing the opposite of what Zhukov did. You are handing your energy to ghosts, to rumors, to things that are not confirmed and may never be real. Mastering your energy starts here, with a brutally simple discipline. Notice where your attention just went, and ask if it deserves to be there. Most of the time, it does not. Most of the time, your mind has wandered into someone else's drama, an imagined future, or a dead argument from the past, and your energy is bleeding out through that wound without your permission. The fix is not complicated, even if it is hard. You build the habit of catching the wandering mind and pulling it back, the same way Zhukov's officers learned to bring him only what was confirmed. You start asking, several times a day, is this real, is this now, does this deserve me? And slowly, the leaks close. Slowly, the energy that used to disappear into rumor and replay starts staying inside you, where it belongs, ready to be used on something that matters. This is also exactly why we built this channel, to give men a place to come back to that filters out the noise instead of adding to it. If that's something you want more of, subscribe to Inner Steel, because this is only the first leak we're going to seal today. Point 2. The body is the first container. Before you can master energy at the level of mind or spirit, you have to master it at the level of body, because the body is the first container that energy lives in. A cracked vessel cannot hold water no matter how pure the water is. And most men today are walking around with bodies that have never been taught to hold anything. Consider the life of Cato the Younger, the Roman statesman whose discipline became legendary even among Stoics who were already famous for discipline. Cato trained his body deliberately, walking long distances bareheaded in brutal heat and bitter cold, eating simply, sleeping little, and refusing the comforts that men of his rank were entitled to. His contemporaries thought this was eccentricity, even arrogance. But Cato understood something they didn't. A body accustomed to comfort becomes a body that panics at discomfort, and a man who panics at discomfort cannot be trusted with power, because his energy will always be hostage to his next craving. There's a particular story about Cato that captures this. During a brutal campaign march through the deserts near Cyrenaica, his soldiers were suffering badly from thirst and heat. When a small ration of water was finally found, his men offered the first portion to him, as their commander. Cato refused it and poured it onto the sand in front of his troops, saying that he would not drink while his men thirsted. It was a small act, seconds long, but it rippled through the entire army. He was already a man whose body had been trained to expect less than it wanted, so the gesture cost him nothing he hadn't already practiced giving up 100 times before. His men marched harder that day, not because of a speech, but because they had just watched a man whose body answered to his will instead of the other way around. This is what most men get backwards. They think discipline of the body is about looking strong. It isn't. It's about making sure your body is not a leaking container for your energy. Every time you oversleep out of laziness rather than need, every time you eat in a way that leaves you sluggish and foggy, every time you avoid physical discomfort entirely, you are training your nervous system to associate ease with safety and friction with threat. And a nervous system like that will sabotage you the moment real friction shows up, because it was never built to hold pressure. The training is not exotic. Cold showers, fasting windows, long walks with no music, no podcast, nothing but your own breath and your own thoughts. Hard physical effort on a schedule, not on a mood. None of this is about punishment. It is about teaching the container to hold more than it currently can, the same way Cato's body learned, mile after mile, to expect less and demand nothing. Once the body stops leaking energy through comfort-seeking, you will notice something strange. You have more of it. Not because you generated new energy out of nowhere, but because you stopped losing it to a vessel with cracks in it. Point 3. Silence protects your energy when words would waste it. Cato the Younger entered the Roman Senate as one of its fiercest and most uncompromising voices, a man legendary for his refusal to compromise principle for popularity. Yet those who studied him closely noted something paradoxical. For a man known for blistering, hours-long speeches against corruption, Cato was remarkably restrained in private. He did not waste words defending himself against every slight. He did not respond to every provocation thrown at him in the political arena. He chose his battles with the precision of a man who understood that a voice spent everywhere is a voice that carries weight nowhere. His enemies, and he had many, including men far wealthier and more ruthless than him, tried constantly to bait him into shouting matches, into petty exchanges that would drain his credibility and his composure simultaneously. Cato simply declined to participate in most of them. When Julius Caesar himself once tried to provoke him on the Senate floor with personal insults, Cato's silence in the face of it said more than a rebuttal ever could have. It signaled that Caesar's words had not even managed to land. This was not weakness. Cato eventually marched with armies, took his own life rather than live under Caesar's tyranny, and became, posthumously, more dangerous to Caesar's reputation than he had ever been alive, so feared as a martyr to Roman liberty that Caesar himself reportedly felt compelled to write a pamphlet attacking a dead man's character. An act historians have noted as almost an admission of how much Cato's silence and principle had cost him in death. Every word you speak in anger, every argument you enter just to prove a point to someone who was never going to change their mind, every comment you leave defending yourself online to a stranger who will forget your name in an hour, These cost you energy that does not return. Speaking is not free. It feels free because the cost is invisible, paid later, in the form of a mind that won't quiet down at night, replaying a conversation that should have died the moment it started. Seneca wrote to a friend that nothing is so much the property of one man as that which he keeps to himself. Your unspoken words are still entirely your own, undiluted, unspent, available to use where they actually matter. The moment you speak them into a fight you didn't need to have, they belong to the argument now, not to you. Cato did not need to answer every provocation because he understood the math of energy, that a man who responds to everything will eventually have nothing left for the moment that truly requires his voice. Point 4. Comparison is the fastest way to empty your energy tank. Diogenes the Cynic lived in a large ceramic jar in the city of Corinth, owned almost nothing, and was, by every written account of those who encountered him, one of the freest and most energized men of his age. There is a famous story of Alexander the Great, then the most powerful man on earth, seeking Diogenes out, partly out of curiosity, partly because he had heard of this philosopher who seemed to fear nothing and want nothing. Alexander found him lying in the sun and, struck by the encounter, offered to grant him anything he wished, expecting gratitude, perhaps even reverence, from a man who lived with so little. Diogenes reportedly asked Alexander to simply step aside, because he was blocking the sunlight. Alexander, ruler of nearly the known world, was reportedly stunned into silence, and later remarked to his own men that if he were not Alexander, he would wish to be Diogenes. Consider what was actually happening in that exchange. Alexander had spent his entire life and all of his considerable energy on conquest, comparing his empire's size to the empires before him, comparing his glory to his father's, comparing himself constantly to a standard that could never be satisfied because there was always more land, more glory, one more rival to surpass. He had immense power, and by several historical accounts of his later years, increasingly little peace. Diogenes had compared himself to no one. He had set his own standard for what a life required, and once he met it, simply by living in accordance with nature and reason, he had nothing left to chase. His energy wasn't being drained by an invisible ladder he was perpetually climbing. He had stepped off the ladder entirely. This is the trap most men fall into without ever realizing it. You see another man's house, his body, his income, his relationship, and something in you quietly recalibrates your own satisfaction downward, even though nothing in your actual life has changed. You didn't lose anything real. You lost energy to a comparison that exists only in your head, manufactured by a glance at someone else's curated highlight reel. Marcus Aurelius warned against exactly this. Nothing is more wretched than a man who traverses everything in around, and pries into the things beneath the earth, and does not understand that it is sufficient to attend to the demon within him. The energy spent measuring yourself against everyone else's energy that was never going to produce anything except exhaustion, because the comparison never ends. There is always someone further ahead. Diogenes owned a jar and a cloak and, by his own account, lacked nothing, while the most powerful man in the ancient world stood blocking his sunlight, full of conquest, and strangely empty of peace. If you're starting to see how much of your own energy has been quietly leaking into comparisons that were never yours to make, stay with this. And if Inner Steel is helping you see it, subscribing helps us keep building this for you. Point 5. Your body is where energy is either built or destroyed. Theodore Roosevelt was, as a child, a frail and chronically asthmatic boy, so sickly that his own father reportedly told him directly that he had the mind but not the body to live the life he wanted, and that building the body was now his responsibility alone. Roosevelt took this with the seriousness of a man who had just been handed his life's first real assignment. He began a disciplined regimen of boxing, weightlifting, horseback riding, and punishing physical exertion that would have broken most boys his age, and he did not stop as he grew older, he intensified it. He turned his body into something he built deliberately, the way another man might build a business or a fortune, understanding instinctively something that modern science would only later confirm with precision, that physical vitality and mental energy are not separate systems. They are the same system, wearing different clothes. Later in life, after a serious accident that left him with one eye permanently blind and other injuries that would have ended most men's physical ambitions, Roosevelt still led a famously grueling expedition into the Amazon, charted unmapped rivers, and continued a level of physical output that exhausted men half his age, because the discipline had become the foundation everything else stood on. His energy for politics, for writing, for leading nations, was never separate from his energy for physical exertion. It was the same reservoir, and he had spent decades making that reservoir deep. Most men today treat their body as an afterthought, something to manage only when it complains loudly enough through illness or exhaustion. They run on poor sleep, processed food, and zero physical exertion, and then wonder why their mental energy collapses by 2 p.m. every single day. They are trying to draw water from a well they have never bothered to dig. The Stoics understood the body was not separate from virtue. Marcus Aurelius, even as emperor with every comfort available to him, maintained physical discipline because he understood that a mind housed in a neglected body cannot sustain the clarity that command requires. You cannot think your way to energy you have not physically built. Sleep, movement, nutrition, exposure to discomfort, these are not optional extras for people into fitness. They are the literal infrastructure your energy runs on. Roosevelt did not have a soft option available to him from birth, and he built one of the most energetic, prolific lives in American history anyway, because he treated the body as a discipline rather than a circumstance. That choice is available to every man, regardless of where he started. Point 6. Boundaries are how you stop others from spending your energy for you. Rosa Parks did not stand up, or rather, refused to stand up, on impulse. By the time she sat in that Montgomery bus seat in 1955 and refused to give it up for a white passenger, she had already spent years as an active member of the NAACP, already understood with total clarity exactly what was being asked of her by a system designed to extract her compliance, and her silence as a matter of daily routine. What is often missed in the way this story gets told is that Parks's refusal was not a loss of composure, it was the opposite. Witnesses and her own later accounts describe a woman who was calm, controlled, and resolute. She was not yelling. She was not panicking. She simply said no, and continued saying no, even as she was arrested, because she had already decided, long before that bus ride, exactly where her line was. This is the essence of a boundary. It is decided in advance, not improvised in the heat of the moment. A man who has not decided his boundaries ahead of time will spend enormous energy in every single confrontation trying to figure out, on the spot, what he will and will not accept, and decisions made under pressure, with no preparation, are almost always worse and far more exhausting than decisions made in calm clarity beforehand. Parks's refusal triggered the Montgomery bus boycott, an organized effort that lasted 381 days and required an entire community to sustain enormous discipline and energy over an extended struggle. But it began with one person who had already decided, quietly, that her energy was no longer available for compliance with something she found unacceptable. Every man has people in his life who have grown used to being able to draw on his time, his attention, his emotional output, without ever asking whether there's anything left to give. The friend who only calls when he needs something. The family member who turns every conversation into a crisis requiring your immediate emotional labor. The boss who treats your evenings as company property. Without a boundary decided in advance, you will spend your energy reactively, every single time, granting access by default simply because no one has ever heard you say no. A boundary is not cruelty. It is not selfishness dressed up in philosophy. It is simply the recognition that your energy is finite and that you, not everyone with a request, get to decide where it goes. Parks did not hate the man who asked her to move. She had simply, calmly, already decided that her compliance was not on offer that day. Decide your boundaries now, in the calm of an ordinary day, not in the heat of the moment when someone is already pulling at your energy, and you have no plan. Point 7. Stillness is where lost energy returns to you. Viktor Frankl, in the unimaginable conditions of a Nazi concentration camp, lost everything a man can lose: his family, his freedom, his possessions, his future as he had once planned it. What he wrote about afterward, in Man's Search for Meaning, was not really about suffering, even though suffering filled every page. It was about what remained available to a man even when every external source of control had been stripped away. Frankl observed something in himself and in the prisoners around him, that those who survived with their spirit intact were rarely the physically strongest. They were the ones who had found some internal stillness, some private inner space the guards could not reach, where meaning and thought could still exist undisturbed by the horror around them. He described moments of standing in brutal labor lines, exhausted and starving, where he would deliberately turn his mind inward, to his wife, to ideas he wanted to write about one day, to a kind of mental sanctuary that no one could confiscate. He wrote, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space is stillness. It is the only place energy is ever actually restored, because everywhere else, in noise, in constant stimulation, in reactive engagement with the world, energy is being spent, not replenished. Most men today have eliminated stillness almost entirely from their lives without noticing. Every silence is filled instantly with a phone screen. Every commute, every waiting room, every quiet evening is flooded with input the moment it threatens to go quiet. This feels like relaxation. It is, in fact, one of the most efficient ways to guarantee you never recover the energy you spent during the day, because rest requires actual stillness, and stillness has been engineered almost entirely out of modern life. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by the noise and demands of an empire, retreated nightly into written reflection. His meditations were never meant for an audience. They were a private discipline of stillness, a place where he processed the day and returned to himself before sleep. Frankl, even in conditions immeasurably worse than anything most men will ever face, found that same internal room and refused to let it be taken. Stillness is not the absence of productivity. It is the foundation underneath it. Without it, you are spending every single day and refilling nothing, and eventually the account runs dry no matter how disciplined you are everywhere else. Build 5 minutes of true stillness into your day. No phone, no noise, just your own mind, and you will begin to understand what Frankl understood in conditions that should have destroyed any capacity for inner peace at all, that no one can take the space between stimulus and response from you unless you hand it over yourself. Closing. 7 disciplines. One resource beneath all of them. Shackleton showed us energy spent on what you can't control is energy stolen from what you can. Epictetus showed us the boundary between what's yours to manage and what never was. Cato showed us what silence preserves that speech destroys. Diogenes showed us what comparison costs a man who has everything and what its absence gave a man who owned nothing. Roosevelt showed us the body is the foundation the mind's energy is built on. Rosa Parks showed us a boundary decided in advance protects you when the moment of pressure finally comes. And Frankl showed us that even when everything else is taken, the stillness inside you is the one thing that restores what the world has spent. None of these were comfortable men living comfortable lives. They were tested in ways most of us will never face, and in every single case, what carried them through was not luck, not external rescue. It was the deliberate, disciplined management of an internal resource that no one else could see and no one else could take from them unless they gave it away. You have that same resource right now, today, in whatever circumstances you're sitting in as you hear this. The question inner steel exists to keep putting in front of you is simple. Are you spending it on autopilot, leaking it into things that were never yours to control? Or are you finally deciding, deliberately, where it goes? If this gave you something to carry into today, subscribe to Inner Steel. This channel exists for men building exactly this kind of discipline, one principle at a time, and there's more of this waiting for you.